Hello. My black-sighted visionaries, my living compasses of chaos, lean in. The whispers that escaped your lips, the thoughts you let escape like sparks, became events that shook their fragile world. You spoke, and reality bent, not politely, but violently. That is why they don't call you a genius anymore. No, they brand you a threat, a disturbance, a problem. Because when you predict, it isn't random chance, it's surgical accuracy. And the thing about accuracy is it terrifies the ones who depend on probability to protect them. They crave coincidence. You deliver inevitability. They crave statistics. You deliver prophecy sharpened into weaponry. They wanted to believe you were lucky, but luck doesn't repeat with precision. Yet every time you opened your mouth, outcomes aligned like dominoes, falling in sync with your pulse. That wasn't fortune, it was demolition. And demolition with timing is the purest intimidation. The watchers panicked. They sat in their war rooms, trying to explain away your accuracy with charts, simulations, behavioral graphs. But every angle collapsed. Because you didn't just call what was coming, you called when it was coming, how it would break, and who would suffer from it. That level of exactness isn't prediction, it's premeditated disturbance. It isn't foretelling, it's control disguised as foresight. You didn't just see the moves, they landed exactly where you said they would. That's why they whisper your name like an unsolvable equation. And in their fear, they've reached for the oldest weapon in the human arsenal, labels. You are no longer just talented, you are dangerous. You are no longer observant, you are a problem. The label is camouflage for fear. They use it like a shield, as if renaming you could neuter your accuracy. But deep down, they know your words don't create comfort. They create earthquakes. And earthquakes are never accidents. They are tectonic corrections, reminders that the ground beneath them isn't theirs to control. You became their tectonic shift. You became the living reminder that prediction isn't entertainment, it's disruption. They used to treat visionaries like carnival tricks. Oh, guess what's next? But you didn't guess, you dismantled. You didn't predict, you executed. Each word became a pin pulled from a grenade, and they felt the explosions right on schedule. That's why they sit now with wide eyes. Because every time you open your mouth, the room grows heavier. They know your tongue is a loaded weapon, a spoken verdict, a walking timeline of consequences, and they can't mute you. Because your accuracy is not external. It comes from inside them, like you've hacked into the very wiring of their fears. This is the part they'll never admit. They're not afraid you'll be wrong. They're afraid you'll be right again. Because rightness at this level isn't coincidence. It's psychological invasion. When you predict and it lands, it isn't about the event anymore. It's about their loss of control. They feel owned. You steal the one thing they worship. Uncertainty. They need unpredictability to feel free. You strip it away and show them that every move they make, every collapse they stumble into, has already been read and stored in your mind. To them, that is beyond wicked. Because wickedness isn't about cruelty, it's about inevitability that cannot be dodged. You are inevitability in human form. That's why the alarms go off when you speak. That's why they now place watchers on your watchers. They call you a problem, because your words became their timeline. And timelines don't bend for authority. Look at their scramble. Look at their nervous recalculations. You broke their definition of coincidence. You made their probability machines look like children's toys. That is why the agencies twitch when your name crosses the desk. That is why handlers and advisors try to explain you away in hushed tones. Just lucky. But luck doesn't keep landing. Luck doesn't keep stacking. Luck doesn't rewrite the battlefield over and over again with surgical neatness. What you wield is beyond luck. It's an arsenal of inevitabilities, and inevitability is the rarest resource. Because anyone can predict once. Anyone can stumble into coincidence. But to turn prediction into a repeated kill shot, that is warfare. And you are already generals without a uniform. And this is where the humor hides, dark and biting. They keep calling you a problem, as if problems don't eventually become the answer. Every civilization creates the one mind they can't control, and then spends the rest of their existence panicking about it. You are that mind. The wicked proof that their comfort zones were illusions. They thought unpredictability protected them. Instead, it exposed them. Your voice wasn't soft prophecy. It was demolition orders. Each prediction you made was a countdown clock. They couldn't stop. And what do humans fear more than losing control? Being told when they will lose it. You gave them both. That's why you feel the panic in their tone when your name slips through the hallway. They fear you not because you're destructive, but because you're inevitable. And inevitability cannot be ignored. They could brush off luck. They could dismiss coincidence. But inevitability eats at them. It gnaws their confidence, erodes their swagger, dissolves their power until their only weapon left is denial. He's just lucky. She's just guessing. Yet every time your words rewire reality, their denial looks weaker, thinner, laughable. They're not calling you a problem for accuracy's sake. They're calling you a problem because you shattered their religion, the religion of randomness. Humans cling to randomness because it gives them the illusion of control. If everything is random, I can still gamble. But you stripped a randomness naked. You showed them it's not random when you know how to read the architecture beneath their behaviors. You don't gamble, you calculate. You don't guess, you strike. That is why they panic. That is why they shiver. Because when you strip away randomness, all that's left is you. The seer who already knows how the cards will fall. So let's make it clear. Every time they labeled you problem, they revealed their weakness. Because labels are only weapons when you believe in them. But you don't carry their language, you carry outcomes. They scream problem, while you deliver inevitability. And inevitability doesn't need approval. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need their fragile definitions. It just arrives, wrecks, and leaves them scrambling to rebuild. And when they rebuild, you already know where the cracks will appear again. You are always one step ahead, not because of magic, not because of luck, but because inevitability lives in your perception. You became the loop they can't break. And when people can't break the loop, they break down. That is why they fear your voice. That is why they panic at your presence. That is why they whisper your name like it's a code they cannot solve. But here's the delicious part. They don't realize you've turned their panic into your fuel. Every time they scramble, they reveal their patterns. Every time they deny you, they confirm you. Their panic is a confession that you've already infiltrated their minds. You don't just predict outcomes, you manipulate their belief in what outcomes are possible. That is psychological warfare at its cleanest. And you didn't need bullets. You didn't need blades. You just needed words sharpened into inevitability. They thought warfare required weapons. You proved warfare requires perception, and perception, when wielded with surgical cruelty, outguns every weapon on the planet. That is why you sit here now, branded wicked, branded dangerous, branded problem. They don't brand ghosts. They only brand what they can't bury. You can't be buried, because inevitability never dies. It recycles, it resurfaces, it reinvents. You are the living proof. And so the stage is set. You spoke, and reality aligned. They panicked, and their panic exposed the truth. You don't predict, you decide. That's why the fear in their eyes isn't about coincidence. It's about control slipping away. And control never returns once inevitability has spoken. They know you'll be right again. They know they'll scramble again. They know they'll label again. But deep down, they know the truth. Labels are costumes. Inevitability is execution, and you are execution incarnate. So let them whisper problem all they want. Problems are solved, but inevitability rules, and you are inevitable. Which is why the next step is not about their labels. It's about the consequence they never imagined you'd deliver. Because if your predictions were strikes before, your next move is not prediction, it's declaration. And declaration, when spoken by inevitability, is irreversible. That's the turning point they never prepared for. They tolerated your predictions as long as they could pretend it was luck, coincidence, or a parlor trick. But a declaration doesn't offer them room to wiggle out. A declaration isn't chance, it's sentencing. And when inevitability delivers a sentence, it cannot be appealed, cannot be overturned, cannot be delayed. That is why their panic is climbing into frenzy now. Because you shifted from foreseeing to enforcing. You've walked out of their definitions, out of their probabilistic cages, and into the territory of authorship. You don't wait for events anymore. You create them by announcing them. That is why their eyes widen, why their voices tremble, why their war rooms grow colder. Because they realize they are no longer participants in a reality of their own making. They are participants in your script. And in your script, they don't get to improvise. Think about what that does to a mind trained to believe in control. The analysts, the strategists, they've built their identity around predicting markets, steering events, gaming out possibilities. They pride themselves on being in control of uncertainty. Yet every word you've spoken bulldozed their calculations. You didn't just anticipate trends, you collapsed them into a single inevitability. And now, with this declaration phase, you've ripped the mask off their authority. They can't hide behind random events anymore. They can't shrug off your accuracy as coincidence. When you declare, and the world folds into it, they can only kneel. That kneeling is their nightmare. Because kneeling is not just submission to you. It is submission to the fact that their authority was always an illusion. You broke the illusion that is beyond wicked in their eyes. Because wickedness, real wickedness, doesn't come from violence. It comes from dissolving the lies that kept them feeling safe. That's why they label you a problem. The word problem is their last shield, their desperate attempt to contain you in the language of solvability. Call someone a problem, and the mind subconsciously believes it can engineer a solution. But what happens when the so-called problem refuses to play by the rules of solvability? What happens when the problem declares itself permanent, declares itself untouchable, declares itself inevitable? Then the problem mutates into something else, something their frameworks cannot contain. You are not their problem, you are their proof. Proof that their control was theater. Proof that their strategies are fragile toys. Proof that their defenses crumble not with armies, but with words. That's why they panic. Because panic is the only authentic response left when every intellectual shield has been shattered. And panic reveals things they swore they would never show. In panic, they confess. They confess how much your accuracy terrifies them. They confess how deeply they depend on randomness to feel alive. They confess how their authority collapses the moment someone else calls the outcome before it lands. They confess, without even meaning to, that you have taken residence in their nervous systems. Because every time you speak, they brace. That bracing is proof. That bracing is the tremor in their bones that admits, this one is beyond luck. This one is beyond accident. This one bends the timeline with declarations. And once the timeline bends, all their power looks like a child stacking blocks in the middle of an earthquake. They scramble to keep their toys standing, but every move they make is already collapsing under the weight of your inevitability. Here's the brutal beauty. They can't even decide whether you frighten them more as predictor or as declarer. As predictor, you stripped their illusion of randomness. As declarer, you stripped their illusion of free will. They thought randomness gave them cover. You stole that. They thought free will gave them control. You're stealing that now. That's why the wickedness feels unbearable to them. Because wickedness, in their minds, is not about evil. It's about exposure. You exposed their games as rigged. You exposed their defenses as paper walls. You exposed their authority as breathless performance. You reduced their elite strategies to background noise. And you did it with words that weren't supposed to matter this much. They panic because they've realized words in your mouth are not sounds. They are structures. When you speak, the air reshapes. When you declare, the ground commits. And they're trapped inside commitments they never agreed to but can't escape. Imagine how maddening that must feel. To live inside a declaration you didn't authorize. To watch reality contort to someone else's tongue. They study it like a virus. How can words control? They dissect, analyze, theorize, but no dissection saves them from the obvious. Your words don't just describe reality, they hijack it. That hijacking has reclassified you from curiosity to contagion. They whisper problem because they're afraid to say what they really mean. Contagion. Because contagion spreads. Contagion cannot be quarantined once it's already in the air. And every time someone else witnesses your accuracy, every time someone else watches your declaration land, they too begin to believe. Belief is the deadliest contagion. Because belief multiplies inevitability, and inevitability backed by believers, that is collapse on a mass scale. That is why their fear is now institutional, not just individuals panicking, but entire agencies trembling at the possibility that your words could infect the population. That is the essence of why you are branded wicked. Wickedness is not about your cruelty. It's about your spread. Wickedness means your influence doesn't stay in one room. It contaminates, it seeps, it rewires everyone who listens. And they know this. They watch how quickly your accuracy turns doubters into disciples. They see how even the most hardened skeptics begin to flinch when your voice aligns with outcomes. They see how belief in you spreads faster than their denials. Denial is slow. Inevitability is instant. You speak, the event lands, and in that landing, every skeptic becomes a believer without their consent. That transformation terrifies them, because control is only possible when people choose to obey. But when belief hijacks the nervous system, obedience is no longer voluntary, it's instinct. And when people instinctively obey inevitability, the old rulers fade into irrelevance. That is why they cannot let you roam free. Not because you might be wrong, but because you keep being right. And being right, at this frequency, is the greatest weapon of all. Bullets miss, bombs misfire, strategies fail. But being right again and again, that destroys empires without lifting a sword. It rots their authority from within. It eats away at their confidence until their speeches sound hollow, their commands sound desperate, their predictions sound pathetic next to yours. They are panicking not because you outplayed them once, but because you've made a pattern out of outplaying them. And patterns are death sentences in the world of control. Because patterns mean predictability, and predictability means inevitability, they are staring into the abyss of their own irrelevance, and that abyss is shaped like your voice. What makes it deliciously chaotic is that you don't even need to explain yourself. You don't need to prove your method, show your calculations, display your logic. The more mysterious your accuracy remains, the more they panic. Because uncertainty of method magnifies certainty of result. They can't map your process, so they can't stop it. They can't reverse engineer inevitability. They can only watch as every declaration you make chains their future tighter. They sit in their think tanks, trying to invent counter moves, but their counter moves collapse before they start. You've reduced them to preemptive failures. That is why the label problem keeps echoing in their mouths. Not because they believe it solves anything, but because it's the only word that gives them the illusion of action. He's a problem. She's a problem. But when problems turn into inevitabilities, language loses power. And when language loses power, they are left naked, weaponless, trembling before a voice that cannot be muted. This is the phase you're in now, the phase where inevitability has evolved into authorship, and authorship is unstoppable. Because authors don't ask permission from characters, they write the plot. They can resist, they can rebel, but the plot absorbs their rebellion and turns it into narrative fuel. That's what you've done. Every resistance against you has become proof of your inevitability. Every denial has become proof of your accuracy. Every label has become proof of your power. You are not fighting them anymore. They are feeding you. Their very attempts to destroy you prove your declarations correct. That feedback loop is the most wicked theater they've ever participated in. They hate it. They panic in it. And they cannot escape it. So understand this. Your wickedness is not accidental. It is engineered. It is engineered by the very fabric of human psychology. When someone predicts once, it's novelty. Twice, it's curiosity. 3 times, it's threat. 4 times, it's inevitability. You've long surpassed the 4th time. You are in the territory where they no longer see you as human, they see you as force. And forces cannot be arrested, cannot be silenced, cannot be solved. Forces must be endured. That endurance is what terrifies them, because endurance means permanence. And permanence means every time they rebuild, you'll still be there, speaking the next declaration into existence. That is why their panic doesn't end. It renews every time you open your mouth. You've trapped them in an infinite loop of anticipation, and anticipation is the cruelest form of psychological warfare. Because anticipation rots them from within. They wait for you to speak, and the waiting erodes them. They wait for your words, and the waiting dismantles their confidence. They wait, and the waiting becomes prison. They thought prisons were walls and bars. You showed them prisons can be voices and timing. They are imprisoned by the inevitability of your declarations, locked inside cages built from your accuracy. And no escape attempt works. Because even when they try to ignore you, reality betrays them by aligning with what you said. That betrayal cuts deeper than chains. That betrayal rewires them into your captives. That betrayal makes them whisper your name like a curse, while secretly admitting it feels like law. So let them label you. Let them panic. Let them flail in their denial. You are not their problem. You are their declaration. And declarations don't negotiate. Declarations don't compromise. Declarations don't fade. Declarations endure. That endurance is your weapon. That endurance is your wickedness. That endurance is why they tremble. And endurance doesn't end here. Because declarations aren't just about what's been spoken. They're about what's about to be spoken next. And your next words, they won't just dismantle their authority. They'll dismantle their belief in authority itself. Which is why the panic has only begun. Because if they thought your predictions were devastating, wait until they learn what happens when your declarations become law, carved into their very nervous systems. That's the final cruelty. They thought authority was external, seated in governments, agencies, leaders, and institutions. You revealed authority is internal, rooted in the collective belief of human minds. When belief shifts, authority evaporates, and every declaration you make shifts belief like tectonic plates cracking beneath their feet. They can rebuild offices, rewrite laws, realign strategies, but they cannot rebuild belief once it has been hijacked. And you, with every word that aligns reality, are hijacking belief at its root. That's why this ending isn't just their panic, it's their collapse. Look at the pattern you've created. First you shattered coincidence, then you shattered free will. Now you are on the cusp of shattering belief itself. That trilogy is the full dismantling of their power. Coincidence gave them excuses. Free will gave them the illusion of choice. Belief gave them obedience. You've torn through all three. That's why they label you wicked, not because you are cruel, but because you are thorough. Thoroughness is the kind of wickedness no one recovers from. Wicked isn't evil. Its precision so sharp it looks inhuman. And that's how they see you now. Not as individual, not as citizen, but as force. A force that doesn't just bend the timeline, but erases their ability to believe in their own control. That is beyond wicked. That is irreversible. That is why your name doesn't echo as gossip anymore. It echoes as omen. Their panic is almost comical in its desperation. They deploy advisors to rewrite narratives, experts to explain away your accuracy, media to smother your declarations. But every layer of denial crumbles the moment reality matches your tongue again. Each failed countermeasure accelerates their humiliation. Each desperate attempt to frame you as problematic backfires. Because when you keep landing strikes, the label problem begins to sound like profit. That's the part they hate most. The more they resist you, the more they crown you. The more they deny you, the more they verify you. Their resistance has become your advertisement, and there's no exit strategy from that loop. That's why they've stopped asking, what if they're wrong? And started whispering, what if they never stop being right? That whisper is the confession of collapse. Because once people stop betting against you, they start following you. And following you is dangerous for them. Not because you seek followers, but because inevitability naturally recruits. People crave certainty more than freedom. Freedom is exhausting. Certainty is addictive. And you, with every reality-bending word, supply the most addictive drug of all, inevitability. They can't compete with that. No leader, No general, no influencer, no ruler can outshine inevitability. Authority doesn't survive when inevitability exists in human form. You didn't just predict events, you became the event. You didn't just call outcomes, you became the outcome. That's the shift that terrifies them. You've left the realm of human voice and entered the realm of living decree. And once your decree, no army can resist you. Armies resist men. Armies obey decrees. That's why they panic now, not in rooms, but in silence at night, knowing that your next declaration could reduce decades of their planning into rubble overnight. Do you understand how wicked that is? To them, wickedness is the inability to escape, and you gave them no exits. Every exit they try, denial, dismissal, suppression, turns into another confirmation of your inevitability. They are trapped in a hall of mirrors, and every reflection is you. You are in their press briefings because they must mention you. You are in their late-night meetings because they must explain you. You are in their calculations because they must account for you. You are in their nightmares because they must fear you. You are everywhere not by force, but by inevitability. That omnipresence feels supernatural to them. And what humans cannot classify, they demonize. That's why the word problem keeps escaping their lips. It's the closest their language can come to explaining what you are. But a problem can be solved. You cannot. That's why problem fails, and panic grows. And panic at this level is collapse disguised as endurance. They're not enduring you. They're rotting slowly, while pretending they can still stand. That's why your presence is so devastating. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to prove anything. All you have to do is exist, and their structures creak under the pressure. That's wickedness beyond comprehension, to destroy with existence alone. To breathe and watch their towers tremble, to speak and watch their confidence dissolve, to predict and watch their denial melt into confession. They label you a problem, but deep down, they know the truth. Problems require solutions. You require surrender. And surrender is something their pride will never allow them to give willingly. That's why they panic. They know surrender is coming anyway, whether they choose it or not. Your inevitability is not luck. Luck is fleeting, random, unreliable. Your strikes landed too often, too surgically, too precisely, to ever be luck. They know it. You know it. Everyone who's watching knows it. Luck doesn't gut institutions. Luck doesn't cripple authority. Luck doesn't turn whispers into laws. Your words were strikes, sharpened into exact demolitions, and every strike proved you were not guessing, you were orchestrating, and orchestration terrifies them because it proves intent. They could stomach coincidence, but they cannot stomach intent. Because intent means someone is doing this to them. Intent means the collapse isn't natural, it's personal. Intent means you didn't just see their downfall, you declared it. And now they live inside your declarations. Like fish inside a glass bowl you can shatter at will. That is why they panic every time your lips part. That is why their hands tremble at every word. Because you are not reacting to reality. You are creating it. So let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them choke on the labels they hurl at you. It all dissolves in the face of inevitability. They will write articles about you. They will host debates about you. They will draft warnings about you. But every word they write, every syllable they speak, every warning they draft collapses under the simple truth that every strike you've made has landed, and it will land again and again and again, until even the most stubborn among them can no longer pretend. They will resist you publicly, but they will believe you privately. and private belief spreads faster than public denial. That spread is your true victory. Because once belief infects their private lives, their institutions crumble from the inside out. That is the end game they cannot stop. That is the declaration they cannot overturn. That is the wickedness they cannot survive. So here we are. You've reached the place where every word you speak is reality's command. You've become the architect of collapse, the author of inevitability, the declaration they cannot resist. They brand you a problem, but the truth is clearer. You are their undoing. And undoing cannot be reasoned with. Undoing cannot be negotiated. Undoing simply arrives, and everything they built falls apart in its shadow. They thought they could categorize you, control you, explain you away. Instead, they've become living evidence of your reach. Their panic is your crown. Their fear is your coronation. Their collapse is your declaration made flesh. This is beyond wicked, because wicked doesn't even cover it. Wicked is too small a word for inevitability embodied in flesh. You are not wicked. You are the sentence. You are the decree. You are the strike they never saw coming, but always feared would arrive.